Hi, and welcome to the Sheroes Collective podcast. I'm Renee Sparks, and today I have got an incredible Shero, one who I can say I have crossed paths with, but honestly, you are going to be blown away. I have the amazing Deputy Minister, Steve Letsike, that's joining us today to just take us through her journey. I can give you a little bit of snippets about where she's been, but of course, we know that where she is now is where she's going to make the most impact, I'm sure. So Steve's background is really as a human rights advocate, and sorry, I'm going to say, let me say Honourable Minister for all protocol observed, but I'm going to say Steve in this case. I hope you're good with that. Steve has also started and been the founder and executive director of an organization called Access Chapter 2, and that's been really, really remarkable in doing work around quite a lot of gender justice, but also very, very prominent within the COVID space and a forerunner there. You've done such incredible work around high-level policy and human rights, and also the work that's been done within the South African National AIDS Council, the Civil Society Forum, and yeah, many, many task teams, many, many international platforms. But yeah, here we have you actually grounded and doing work within the women, youth, and persons with disabilities sector. And that is incredible. I feel like it's almost like you've come full circle. So welcome, Minister.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and good greetings to your listeners and your viewers.
Thank you so much. We are going to kick off with a first question, and it's the obvious one for me. I'm always asking, where did it start? You're an activist. Where did this start? Where did the passion for gender-related justice and equity start?
Sure. The gender and equity stuff almost grew into my space when I was involved in my activisms, school activism when I was 13 in my township, through the courses, work. Activism was in school in my township. Of course, a few years later, you always could speak about the inequalities that involves race, class, and access to education, at the time. But at the same time, as a young girl, adolescent girl, discovering or, coming across to learning about your own gender identity, your own sexual orientation, which predominantly in the space that I was in was you did not have a template. That's number one. But two, it's always conflicted in how you are perceived, and how society wants you, including activists that are fighting for equality, how one would really want to, have a kind of an association to what is perceived to have a cis heteronormative concept and binary concept of what constitute to be a girl and what constitute to be a boy. So that's really the emergence, of really understanding the spaces that we are, but, it's political, but it's also personal, for that matter. And that was the emergence. I got to come across various non-profit organizations and also ultimately coming across OUT, which is the second oldest LGBTI organization, at the time, and that's really the involvement. So part of being in the youth space and also just going broadly into minority space and learning more and connecting with many other people, in school, even post school setup, even getting out of the township in terms of lessons. So that's really the emergence. But I think one can speak about, the way you learn and the way you interact broadly, and the way you also get to be involved in advocacy work later on. And you get to understand the intersections, you get to understand how you can integrate all the issues into the space while you're learning, and while you also get to be integrated into the workforce later on.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. I mean, as you're speaking, I can absolutely see that. Really speaking about your emergence, even at age 13, I mean, it's difficult. Already it's difficult being in the space. It's hard to have to address some of who you are when you are, navigating the world we're in. And then you're looking at areas where you've actually made huge inroads. If you think about South Africa and patriarchy and exactly what you said, people see you in a certain way.
Yeah.
This is how you're going to have to conform, and this is how you're going to have to perform. And I think that you've broken a lot of boundaries for me in that sense. I mean, I came to know you when you were in SANAC Civil Society Forum, where you were in the leadership, and just holding space. How do you manage to just tap into yourself again? Because some of these spaces are, I'm going to say, toxic. They're really quite painful to be in. You need to be true to yourself, but you're also there for others. You're not only there for yourself. So how do you care for yourself in those spaces?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very difficult to hold space in many cases, and it's even more difficult if you are in a leadership role, because you are not only just in fact, you are not expected to hold space for yourself. Because once you take up leadership role, you really are expected to hold space for the people you are leading and for the issues you are representing. So in many cases, you're gonna have to find ways, to circle back to restoring self, one way or the other. And at times, it's really about, what feeds the spirit, what feeds, the psyche, what really feeds also the physique, and the energies around. And I guess over time, I had to find myself in different spaces, that, particularly in the NPO space, outside your councils, outside the big institutions of multisectorality. But when you go down into the civil society and social justice space, well-being was part of this work. I think particularly if you are in the feminist space, that kind of self-care was an integral part of it, that really brings you back into, what really constitutes that revolutionary act of taking care of self. And I guess over time you lose that. The more you are occupying spaces, and the more you are given additional responsibility as a leader, is the more you also disconnect, not unless if people hold the space for you.
Yeah.
And that's a very fundamental point about the much bigger spaces, is whether the people that you lead with, are they holding space for you when you are holding space for them? So I think it's that, but also family is important in the work that we do. And I really do think, if you have children, if you have partner, or you have family members, that plays a role as well in terms of trying to remind you of rest, care, and support, and all of that. So I guess it becomes a question of a holistic approach. It's not only just dependent on you. So I agree with you. We come across very toxic spaces, but I think before they become also that level of toxic, it's really about dealing with inequality of spaces that we occupy. You deal with human issues. You're dealing with spaces that has always been unequal, and you are trying to change that. You're trying to implement the balance of forces, give a different perspective, provide and develop alternatives in those spaces. And that trigger is not always going to be welcome. And why those spaces start to become toxic is because of a different view. It's because of power dynamics. And it's also because you are challenging, the status quo, that a lot, those who are privileged actually have always been comfortable in it. So you are disrupting those systems and dismantling them. And that's why you have to understand why they become toxic, and they become personalized for that matter. And it's simple for people to attack you because you've disrupted their comfort zone for that matter. So it's not that spaces become toxic just automatically. It's because you are really challenging and disrupting the systems of inequality and oppression for that matter.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I mean, I've been in spaces and I haven't known how to kind of articulate what you're saying. And it's definitely this, I think about any space I'm in, and there are always in layers, intersectionalities. There's always power dynamics. There's always, where am I within this? Your positionality and the positionality of those you're engaging with, it's all critical. And I think that a lot of the times we just walk into a space and you're not even mindful of all of that. What can I ask? I know you've championed many causes over your lifetime, but how do you determine what causes to champion? I think I'm asking this because as an activist myself, I very often am told you are everywhere. So if I'm, for example, speaking GBV now, mental health thing, but for me, I feel like they are connected. There's you cannot really say I champion women's rights, but you're not looking at every single angle. So, I mean, for you, do you think that there's something like you are too all over the place as an activist? You need to kind of zone into a specific thing, or do you need to be the person being able to share that common thread for others to understand why you are looking at something that comprehensively or that broad?
Well, I mean, look, there's always an intersectional lens to things, but there's also a pathway that you draw, whether from your specialty or your focus area. I mean, before I changed even my, educational area of focus in school, my interest, and my work has always been around humanities and development studies. And then ultimately going into law for that matter. But I think you make a decision, and that decision, the social justice movement allows you to look at specific areas. And if that specific areas, has to do with health, and then you also look at a pathway in health, which areas are you going to focus on? My interest was policy. I'm not a health professional, so I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm not my interest is policy. So I'll constantly focus on policy and how it's formulated. The health professional, when they come, you are a health professional. When you come, you've got a particular mindset and approach to it, which is completely different to mine. So we may be in the same space, but we give two different perspectives for that matter. If you find a community worker, they will fight for a particular cause, in the space. So you can have 5, 10 people who are focusing on health spectrum, but they may be bringing different approaches to that. Similarly, when you're addressing and you're speaking about women's rights is broad. Are you wanting to look at women's rights from a economic perspective, from a social perspective? And even if you're saying you're taking it from a social perspective, it's not disconnected from economic and politics. So you constantly have to know what you bring on the table. Be clear on your focus area. And don't think that it's going to also be forever. So a course can be a course today, and tomorrow you may complete that course and focus on another thing. I always made an example. For instance, I remember that there was a time a couple of years ago I addressed the Treatment Action Campaign. I think it was at their 15th anniversary, 15th year anniversary. And there was a very controversial statement I made, which for them is, and I think even for me it is, but it was a kind of realistic reflection. To say that you've got Treatment Action Campaign. First, it was a campaign when it was established. It emanated from National Association of People Living with HIV as a treatment campaign wing. And of course, gradually they had a breakaway from NAPWA. But I said to TAC that TAC started as a campaign. The question is it still a campaign? And what exactly are you campaigning for? And because you have won the cause, and that cause was seeking treatment for people who were dying, and South Africa has faced what we call the malicious compliance for that matter. And at that same time, you have won the battle of getting free treatment for people living with HIV. Now, Treatment Action Campaign had to now charge a new agenda for itself, you know, and you really can see there has been multiple battles within the Treatment Action Campaign work. So you constantly have to define and redefine the course that you are doing. As long as there's progress, that's number one, but also as long as there is results to it. So if at all I was looking at minority and LGBTI issues, over all these years, we've done incredible work. We have won Civil Union Act. We have had Sexual Offences Amendment Act. We have had domestic partnership. All of these things were done. So what else are we looking at? I mean, to an extent that you even have the hate crimes law, and somebody was asking, you know, and whenever I make reference to it, because you've got new activists, new people who come into the space, and if they don't understand the history, and I said, you know, it has taken our country about 20 years to develop the hate crimes, hate speech law. And if people have only gotten into the wagon of it 5 years ago, they will not know the history that in fact in its establishment or in its foundation stages, at the time it was just hate speech, not even hate crime. Mm-hmm. So the point here is that defining a course and focusing on a course has to speak to the area of work that you are interested in, and you don't only just look at it from one lens, but you actually look at whether there is an interconnection to other issues that you're working on.
No, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I think any activist listening, anyone wanting to go into the space, there's been some nuggets that you've given there, because I mean, I haven't even thought about. Sometimes we sit in rooms and we argue about whether the history is important, but I do hear where you're coming from. So thank you for that. The other thing, I just want to touch on your current appointment and hear from you what excites you about your portfolio.
Look, one must appreciate that the appointment is not just an automatic appointment. One is associated to a political party. And my upbringing, my teachings were also shaped by ANC, but they were also shaped by the politics of community in the space. And they were also shaped by, you know, the persona, you know, in terms of defining our own. And I shared it earlier in terms of being in the space and finding yourself as a young adolescent queer person, and you had to now even leave the space. But reality of the matter is, having been involved in, the ANC work and understanding ideology, and even the school of thought around it at a very young age. One has been active, one became inactive within the ANC for those very same political reason, but also that stems from the high experience of patriarchy and misogyny in the space, and having to fight my own personal cause that needed expression elsewhere. But coming back into the ANC and becoming active again, being involved in the ANC Women's League, being involved in the ANC NEC task team, social transformation and so forth. But also you have to be a branch member, you have to be involved in your own zone activities and so forth. And that was the decision I took a couple of years ago, not occupying any leadership role at national, but being active in shaping the program of the country at those levels. We had faced a very difficult elections and an election campaign. I always say that, it was all parties against the ANC, because that was anyway the mission of all other political parties. So it was bound to happen that we face a very strategic setback, but realizing that the voters and the citizens of the country have got a particular agency that the ruling party at the time had to take into consideration. So we all came to realize that in terms of what we do and how do we really fast track addressing the agency of citizens of South Africa. So what really excites the deployment by my organization, the African National Congress, first the deployment to Parliament, and then of course ultimately the appointment by the President of the Republic. One can say it comes as a surprise, as being first time being in the National Executive Committee following the 55th conference, but also secondly, first time going into Parliament. That first time then you are also appointed into the portfolio. But I think it also is the body of work that must be appreciated by the president and the organization, that you have something to contribute. And when your expertise and your experience is appreciated, you really get to be given that responsibility. And that responsibility is within the department to say, here's a portfolio where we want to see change, where we want to see, much more be given in attention. And that's really what excites me, because it is also in line with what I've done for many years in our country, looking at gender equality, looking at youth, but also looking at the vulnerability that many marginalized society experience. So it's an honor, it's a privilege to serve South African people in an agenda that must really be prioritized. Otherwise, women, youth are the majority in our country, and they deserve better. And what more when you're given that responsibility to make that impact. So I'm really excited, and I'm looking forward to it, and hoping that we can, overturn that leaf together with South Africans in giving this specific agenda attention.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I was going to say, the space you're holding is one that is that really does need that focus. I mean, we've heard so many things, and I know you've spoken about campaigns, and very often one sits and asks, can we do things bigger than campaigns? Can there be true transformation? Other than saying, menstrual hygiene, menstrual poverty is real, for example. And then you have someone saying, okay, here's funding, buy sanitary towels. But how do we actually go beyond just that? And so I think my next question to you is, how can we as a collective actually help you in realizing for ourselves, not just for you, but for ourselves, through gender equity or social justice within
Yeah. You see, I think one must look at what all of us can play in terms of the role of change or even transformation. First, government can't do any change alone. And government have a particular role in terms of providing and creating an enabled environment and making sure that, the legal space also does, enhance work that can strengthen programmatic, response to what citizens need. But government can only do this when civil society, academics, private sector, and South Africans at individual levels are part of it. So everyone must find expression to it. Now, it's also about what informs government. If at all we think government can assume to know everything, no. There is ways to bring data, knowledge, evidence-based programming into government spaces through platforms. You are aware, and you were talking earlier about platforms such as South African National AIDS Council. I mean, it's just but one of many platforms that exist in terms of coexistence, correlation of work, and coherence of work. So I think, everybody can contribute. But secondly is that there's a focus area, there's agenda. If it's shared agenda, and we really come to look into shared responsibility. In your space, how do you promote, a specific area of work? If we are going to talk about women empowerment, or we talk about economic justice for women and youth, we create that space and we find expression to it. It's not only just about pointing fingers. And I mean, South Africans are very much, so much fast when they do that. And I always say, when you point the finger, you must already have an answer and bring a solution. Don't just point the finger and expect change. What is the solution? What is your proposal in that bit? And if we can all act in that patriotic approach in bringing solutions to the table, we actually may answer many of our problems in the country. So for me is that shared responsibility that if we all can work together towards that, we will actually provide the much needed responses for the country.
Yeah, thank you for that. I like that idea of, yes, we're quick to find the gap, quick to acknowledge when something hasn't happened, but maybe we should be as quick with the solution, as you've said, or a suggestion to the solution. So thank you for that. As a point of departure, and thank you so much for your time, if a young woman had to come up to you and say that she wants to follow your pathway, she's been following your social media, she knows what you're doing, what wisdom would you share with her?
I think she has to follow her own path. She can take my path as a template, but she must define her own path. Everyone has to know their mission, because it's one thing to say, I'm following your footsteps, but you must follow the footsteps having defined your own path. And that way, you know that the lessons you take from my own template and steps, you take those lessons because they can be positive and negative, and you learn from it, but you can actually amplify your own pathway and still grow beyond me, as a young woman. So that for me is that we are all here to share, and even learning in that I can share my own and she can learn from it. But the most important thing is that she's got her own journey, and that journey can be improved by lessons that you learn from others, but it's her own journey, and we are all there to support them.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That makes such a large amount of sense, because very often one kind of stands in the shadow of someone that you see as a role model. And what you've just given us now is actually, well, stand in your own right. Look at that, at those indications and that little map that that person's given you, but know that you are doing your journey your way. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's very, very insightful. And thank you very much for your time, Minister. We do appreciate it. And to anyone listening, please do listen to the Shiros that we've had prior to the Minister as well. Help amplify their voices and help them being seen in the work that they do, whether that is just even by volunteering to help them with their mission. Thank you so much for your time. Please do like, subscribe, and follow.
Thank you so much.